So which is it, 2,300 days, or 42 months? There are two main prophetic events that occur in the book of Daniel, and those are called the transgression and abomination of desolations. First, I'll explain the transgression of desolation seen in Daniel chapter 8 verses 13 and 14, and then explain the abomination of desolation in chapter 11 verse 31, reading both from the King James Version. Daniel 8 verses 13 and 14 says, "Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Next I'm going to read how this verse is interpreted in the Old Testament interlinear Bible. The interlinear versions of both Old and New Testaments are a word-for-word interpretation of the Masoretic and Greek texts, not to be confused with translation of the verses. Note that some words in the King James Version translation, and all others, are not there because they were added for the purposes of translating the verses, for them to make sense to the reader. Interpreting and translating are two separate things. Any place in both the Old and New Testaments where you see a word in parentheses, bold print, or in italic, means that the word was not in the original Hebrew Masoretic or Greek manuscripts. These facts must be considered when pondering how the scriptures were meant to be conveyed and understood. This is what Daniel chapter 8 verses 13 and 14 says when reading them from the Old Testament interlinear Bible, and please note how the word sacrifice is omitted from the text. "And I heard a Holy One speaking, and said, Holy One to that certain who was speaking, How long the vision the daily and the transgression of desolation the giving, and both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled? And he said to me, 4 evenings, days, 2,300, then shall be cleansed the sanctuary." We can see by the previous, word-for-word interpretation, that the word sacrifice, as in, the daily sacrifice, was not originally spoken by the angel in the Hebrew or Aramaic languages that the book of Daniel was originally written in. But what does this mean? It means that these verses could have been mistranslated. In the word-for-word interpretation, these verses could instead mean that the daily, or that which is done in continuity, ceases, and the host and the embodiment of his sacred institution were trampled underfoot. And from the start of that happening until it stops, or until it's cleansed, is 2,300 days or 6 years, and 3 months rounding down according to the Gregorian calendar. Thinking about this on a mathematical level, how could this be referring to the Jewish temple in this time frame, when Revelation chapter 11 verse 2 says that the court of the Gentiles, and the holy city Jerusalem, will be trodden underfoot for 42 months? So which is it, for 2,300 days or 42 months? You see, even the math doesn't add up. That being understood, it appears that these verses are not talking about a sacred temple of God, and a priest as its host, but rather, about a sacred institution, and the leader thereof. Side note, the only place in Daniel's prophecy where the word sacrifice is present in the Masoretic text is in Daniel chapter 9 verse 27. In that verse, it states how the sacrifice and the oblation ceases. Therefore, unlike the previous verses, we can see that this verse is literally referring to animal sacrifices. In summary, I will talk about the second desolation, the abomination of desolation seen in Daniel chapter 11 verse 31, and how the word sacrifice is also omitted from the original text of this verse as well. Like the previous segment, I will read it from both the King James Version and the Old Testament interlinear Bible as a comparison. Daniel chapter 11 verse 31 says, "An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes it desolate." But, the Old Testament interlinear Bible says, "And forces by him shall be mustered, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, they shall take away the daily, and place the abomination of desolation." As you can see, the word sacrifice is not in this verse either. This tells us that this verse may not be referring to a Jewish temple, and by default, would have to be referring to a sacred place of strength, of a different type. The word sanctuary is translated to mean sacred place, and the word strength is translated as a means of safety, protection, refuge, or stronghold. These words would not be used if it were referring to the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple, because the Holy of Holies would be no one's means of personal safety, protection, or refuge. Whatever this edifice turns out to be, the mouth of the little horn will be given 42 months to desecrate it this way. Thanks for watching this video, and please subscribe or copy and paste the link of my channel on your desktop for future reference, so you won't miss other very important messages regarding these final years of our current age.